Hello, everyone. This is Keith Parent. I'm the CEO at Cory Group, and this is the Driving the Business of Science podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We have a special guest today, Cory, a longtime partner of Court Squares on the pharmacovigilance side. And Betty's going to talk a little bit today about pharmacovigilance compliance for small and mid-sized sponsors. Interesting topic because I don't know as much about pharmacovigilance as I probably should, so I'm looking forward to getting a lot of great questions answered. And let me talk a little bit about Court Square first before we start. We are a managed service firm. We manage infrastructure for life science companies. When we drive the business of science, I look at all of the things that pharma companies spend money on, and I think IT should be one that they get the right amount of work for what they're doing. We call it fit for purpose. We have a system called Regdocs 365, which is a content repository for clinical and regulatory content. And it's really a platform for any kind of content you want to have in this space. In this case, we're talking about some pharmacovigilance content. So let's get into it and let's talk about our guest today, which is Cory. Betty, if you give us some background and tell us a little bit about the company.
Sure. Thanks so much, Keith, for having me. So my name is Cory, as you said, and I'm the president at Regxia, and we're a consulting firm based in Canada. So we were formed in 2007 and predominantly to serve the small to mid-sized business. That's our niche. We're a small business ourselves, so we can feel the same things that they do. We provide regulatory and quality and pharmacovigilance consulting to them. And as you said, we've been a partner with Court Square now for a number of years in many aspects of our business, and that's made us much stronger in our fields.
I will say that the one thing I like about Regxia is that they always have very nice couches when we go to the DIA Global show, and I'm looking forward to that in a couple of weeks. Every time I need to take a break, I go to Betty's booth and sit on her couches, which is great. So Betty, thank you for giving us some time today. One quick question is just, what is pharmacovigilance? For those people out there that don't know what pharmacovigilance is, what is it? Why is it so important out there, and why is it such a challenge for small companies to deal with it?
So pharmacovigilance is looking at the safety of your product, but different than the clinical world. This is looking at it in the real world, Keith. So it's after the doctor is prescribing that new medicine you've developed to actual patients that are not taking it according to the clock on the wall and the CRO that managed that study. They're just using it the way they will in real life. And that actually produces a lot more effects than we ever saw in clinical trials. And they're important because now we need to start looking at how safe that product really is. When people just use it, sometimes for the reasons you developed it, and sometimes to use it outside of those indications.
No, I've heard a lot about different things, and I've been involved with patient registries and things like REMS registries and things like that, which are longer term views of patients. We're always looking for adverse events and things like that. So that fits in with the whole pharmacovigilance world.
It does. It does. Those tend to be commitments that a company makes to a regulatory authority like the FDA. It's to continually monitor your product in a certain population or in the real world, as I mentioned. But it really is, again, to bring it right down to exactly what is the best way to use that, and how can doctors prescribe it in a safe way for their patients.
So why do we need to manage that PV data? What's the driving force for that?
Well, as always, we have data, and more data. We're always producing more. The other thing that we're living in a world where patients are more aware of the effects that their drugs have and how to report them. So we get more effects produced and we get more reports. So when we look at these, the data just keeps rolling in, and we have to figure out some way to do it. If I went back in my life, I'd be using my Excel spreadsheet, or even back in my old notebook with Post-it notes. And I can't do that anymore because it's not enough to be able to look at these things and start to see if I'm seeing a new event or a more serious event or a change in how that product is affecting the population that's taking it. So we're now in a situation where you have so much data, you have to organize it in some way. There's only big, huge companies out there to help you. And if you're a small company, what do you do with that? Like, where do you start?
Now, are there rules and things like that they have to go by when they're dealing with this stuff, or so when you're looking at the data and you're trying to pull that data together, what are you actually doing with that data?
There are rules. Of course. And then sometimes you have to report all those events to the FDA or any other authority. And that means you're starting to gather, what other drugs was that patient taking? How long did they take the drug? Were they taking it for the right reasons? You know, what's their age? What is their population class, and so on. It can go on and on and on. And not only that, you follow up with that patient and get more and more information about how an event resolves. And in the end, we get all that information and somebody has to look at it and assess it, and decide, is this an effect actually of that drug? Or is it an effect that's coming from something else? How important is this to our prescribing information? And do we need to make a change to that? And then eventually get into just the plain old regulatory requirements of annual safety reports that have to be submitted to the FDA. And that also means that we're taking all that data and we're manipulating it in such a way that we can see if something's happening more often than it was before, in a more serious way. A lot of these, I'm saying this in a very simple way, but it's a huge amount of data that you're trying to put in some form of order that you can make some decisions about.
I'm thinking in terms of some old projects that I did where we had some patient registries and we would have to create, adverse events based on certain criteria hitting, and then those would have to be adjudicated. Is this process you're talking about right now, is that adjudication process?
Absolutely. Adjudicating is the word. I sometimes you say assessed, but adjudicated is actually a really good term, because you have to have a medical personnel that's looking at these in a very unbiased way as well, because you have to be open to the fact that your drug may produce an effect that you don't want or an effect that we need to control.
Have you been involved where you've seen over time that all of a sudden things they didn't think were happening were actually happening that didn't show up in a clinical trial?
Yeah, definitely. And it's inevitable, because in clinical trials, we have this neat little concise group that we say, you must be this, and this in order to take part in our trial. And they aren't like you and me, just regular folks out there that, have gone to our doctor because of a problem and they're now being prescribed this new product. It's inevitable that we see these new events, and unfortunately, it's probably inevitable that we're going to see something serious that affects how we prescribe it.
Well, it's funny because I know that when I talk in the clinical space and we're talking about, putting together protocols for clinical trials and trying to get patients there, you're trying to narrow down that focus. You get the right patient population to help your drug get approved. But in reality, what may be doing is that by narrowing that patient population, you may be missing some of those effects on people that you didn't think about,
Absolutely. That's the real crux of the problem.
What are some of the challenges from adopting these smaller companies from adopting a PV system, or a particularly electronic PV system?
Yeah, well, I think nowadays, Keith, it has to be an electronic system. You can't do it without it now. Even if you only have one product, you can't do it. There's too many things that you have to be able to look at. So why don't they adopt? Well, the most of the ones that are out there, and I've complained to you about this, are costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to even start, and they're so complex, more complex than a small company may need. And I can speak from personal experience, because we provide PV services to a company, and I can't adopt those large systems because it's far more than I need. It's far more expensive, and I don't have the IT infrastructure that can help me support that system. Even I'm small too, so everybody outsources things, but that's one of the real biggest problems, I think, and it's scary because it's so complex. And the other is, when you're a small company and you go talk to some of these big guys, we're not their interest.
Right.
Well, they're interested in
guys. I think the other issue too is that they look at it as they've got to deal with it for a very large company, and you may be small, but the reality is they're not going to charge you any less than that, right? It's going to still be what they're trying to do. I mentioned earlier that we think about the concept of fit for purpose. I think that's one of the reasons why working with you guys, coming up with a PV system that was meant for small companies is just makes a lot of sense to me. So having something out there that you guys can use with your client base is perfect for doing some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I think is the most exciting thing. And it's been exciting for my clients too, as I've been talking about it. But the idea that we can talk to that small company and say, I want you to be able to adjudicate those events and manage that data and do what it is you do best. And then we'll rely on a company such as CourtSquare to manage that IT part of things that can keep us in compliance from that aspect. And I don't have to be concerned with that. I can actually be looking at the actual data. And this is, I think, goes back to what the main problem for a small company is. With all that data coming in, you end up getting lost in that data, Keith, and to a point where you forget what you were doing in the first place.
Well, it's funny, Betty, when you start to talk about that, it's hard for some people to realize, or some companies to realize, stick to your knitting, stay what you're, focus in on what's really important to you, and do that. We talk to a lot of small companies, particularly small sponsor companies that really want to start building out this function or that function. And the reality is, focus on your science. Our premise was driving the business of science was, we want to help you with the business aspect of what you're doing so you can focus in on your science. I would much rather see a small company coming out of an incubator or getting out there with their first funding round, focused on getting to that next round with their science, as opposed to blowing it on all this software or something that they just don't need yet. And we talk about it time and time again, where you get people coming in from big pharma companies and they have to have this product or that product. And it's just, and I'm sure it's the same thing with a PV thing. They say, hey, I use this PV system at Pfizer or GSK or some other place, and they need you to have that, and they just force you to get something in that's just not worth it.
No, absolutely. And then the other side, I think that a lot of small companies then resort to, and it's hard for me to say this because I'm a consultant, but is they start to outsource the whole process. And there's companies that you can just offload the entire receipt of events and let them take care of it. But again, if you're a small company and you do that, you're a small number in their picture. You're not really seeing those events come in. If most small companies today have one or two products that may be very novel, they could even be for rare diseases. And if they're not in touch with what's actually happening and seeing those events, then they're going to miss out on things. And they're the ones that know that product.
Now let's talk about that. When you talk about as a consultant and a consultant to these companies working with that kind of stuff, how do you work with these small companies, and how do you show them that it's the best way to go to work with you to help them to review their own data?
Well, that's exactly what we do, and I think it's because I'm old school. Let's put it that way. And I've come from a place where, it's got to be simplified for me. And to be very honest, I still think that a great deal of pharmacovigilance is simple in its fact. And you get lost in the data. So what I do with our clients is we really emphasize that we're small too. We understand what it's like to be a small company, and we understand the challenges that they face with the data. And so we try to put together something that allows them to be a part of it. Again, they're the ones that know their product. They know it far better than I do. But I want to put something together that gives them the information in a way in which they can start to make connections with what's happening, to be able to recognize themselves. Hey, wait a minute, that's bradycardia. Look at how often that's happening. This is new. We need to talk about this. Or, wow, that was a serious event, and didn't we have the same thing happen before? But we can start to sort events and see what they call signals in the pharmacovigilance world, and see those things. So we work with that, trying to be the same as them, if you will. We've worked with CourtSquare to help develop those tools that we can use too, because it was hard for me to be able to do that, or in even QA services, without having some kind of an electronic system that allows me to put that information together, and to be able to demonstrate to an authority that it's validated.
Now, you're from Canada, obviously working with US-based companies, so you're international in nature from there. But do you work with companies that actually do have their drugs in other countries as well?
We haven't done that. We work with an awful lot of partners in Europe. Europe is another cat, if you will. It's a big place with a lot of different rules and a lot of languages. And again, it's one of those things of, we stick to what we know we do well. So we have stuck mostly to North America. Our business is focused on the US and Canada.
So you still do Health Canada and the FDA are the main focus areas?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
What should an SMB be looking for to maintain PV compliance? What do they have to put in place to do that kind of stuff for compliance aspects?
Well, Nowadays, they've got to find an electronic system of some sort or outsource. So they've got two choices. You can go to the big guys if you've got some people, and to me, you need to have IT experts at the ready with you if you're going to go that route, because you need to understand how those systems work and what actually, more importantly, what you can do to ruin those systems, because that's typically the issue that happens. Outsourcing, you need to be able to find a partner. I like to think of them as partners that can think like you and to help you gather that same information and keep it organized for you. So they have to be a partner. They have to think like you. They have to be able to, what's the word? They need to appreciate that you're a small business with maybe one or two products that you've thrown your entire life into developing. So you need to work with that. But the skinny on it all is you need an electronic system. So you've got to figure out, what am I going to do? How do I validate that? And how do I demonstrate that it's a valid system to a regulatory authority? You know, eventually you're going to get inspected, and I've got to have all of that documentation in place to show the FDA or Health Canada that says this system is controlled. I know exactly what's been entered into it. There's been no manipulation of this, and my data is secure.
Great. Tell me a little bit about the business itself, Betty. How did you get started? And how long have you been in business actually for Regxia?
Regxia has been in business since 2007. I have been in business since the 80s, though. So, but you know, I began my life at the University of Toronto. I started in research. I thought that was where I wanted to be, and the grant that was providing my job dried up, and I had to go look elsewhere. And I ended up at a contract research organization, and I learned that I loved it. I loved the pace that was in there, seeing a lot of different clients, looking at different products, looking at the studies. I got to look at the whole picture, Keith. It was marvelous, and I really did that for about 20 years, and then really just kept going and decided to become a consultant. And my business partner Lori DeMonick and I met, and we worked very well together and had the same kind of feeling about the type of client we wanted to work with and the quality of work that we wanted to provide. We really wanted to say, we'll become a part of your organization for you. You don't have to think of us as outsourced and you're just a number in our books. We want to become an arm or a surrogate to your departments and work alongside in the way that you need us to. And you know, I think we've been successful. I have clients that I've had for well, more than the lifetime of Regxia, to be honest.
That's great.
Which I love. You know, we have them, they come, their family.
You know, and you can tell that when you see people come and visit with you at DAA and sit on your couches. I know that feeling.
Yeah.
We feel like family with you guys now, with all that we've been with you for so long now, working with you hand in hand, and the fact that we have got a couple things out there together, I think it's fantastic. Love to see the interaction between your team and my team. So I think that's fantastic as well. As we are getting toward the end of our time, tell me a little bit more about what you think you want people to take away from this and things you want them to know about pharmacovigilance in general, and then Regxia in the long run.
Wow, big questions. I think, and I'm going to frame this specifically for that small to mid-sized company as we've been talking about, but I think what I want them to do is say to them is to not lose sight of what it is that you're actually supposed to accomplish through PV, right? And not get lost in this idea that data is everything, and I have so many bits and bytes that are sitting here, but I don't actually know what all of them mean. You've got to be strong and look for a partner that thinks like you, perhaps is a size like you, like us, that works for some, and one that seems to understand what they can do to leverage tools such as Courtspur has been able to work with us to develop and leverage that. So I can use it day to day, and I don't have to go and get an IT degree to understand how it works. And I think that's the sum total. And if, you know, Regxia is a company to help you, then we're always there. And if we're just one to help you find that partner, we're there for that too.
Fantastic. Betty, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I think it was a wonderful discussion. I think I know a little bit more about PV than I knew before, so that's fantastic. I know a lot more about you and about the company, which is fantastic as well. And I will definitely see you in a couple of weeks, obviously, so that'll be good. Do you have a booth number do you know what your booth number is for DIA? You want to encourage people to come around and see you?
I should know that, Keith, but I don't.
I don't know mine either. I'd
I
like to
follow
say,
along.
I agree with you. And I actually have on my email signature, so I got to memorize that when I'm doing these kind of things so I can talk to people.
Yeah.
But look for Betty, look for Regxia at DIA Global, look for Court Square at DIA Global. We'll look to see you guys. Now that I say that, I don't even know if this is going to get out there before DIA happens. So hopefully we'll do that. So we'll take that on as an action item. Thank you very much, Betty. It was a great having you on here. And again, this is the Driving the Business of Science. Again, Betty Cory from Regxia. Fantastic. Thank you, Betty. Have a great day.
Thanks, Keith. Really appreciate it.